Do you want to get started on your sourdough journey but not really sure where to start? I am hosting a free beginner series sourdough course, I guess. So we're going to be starting off first up with making our starter from scratch. So this is day one. On day one, you're going to weigh your jar first so that you know how much the weight of your jar is for future days where you need to discard. And then you're going to zero out your scales and you're going to add 50 grams of bread flour and then another 50 grams of bottled or filtered water. Now you'll see here I slightly went over with the water. So a good way to remove a little bit of excess water is using a paper towel, and it will absorb up some of that water. You just dip it in and it will absorb till you get back to your quantity that you want. So then you're going to give that a good mix. I'm using a spurtle, but you can use a spatula, a fork, anything to give it a good mix. And then you're going to scrape down your sides and pop your lid on it. You want a loose-ish lid, like I've got here with the wet jar. And then you're going to leave it on your counter and come back tomorrow for part 2. So I will see you then. It's day 2 of making our sourdough starter from scratch. And so we're going to remove 50% of what we have in our jar. So if you weighed your jar prior, like I said yesterday, then you'll know how much starter you have in there and you need to remove half of that. So for me, it was 100 grams. So I'm removing 50 grams of that starter that's in there. Now I put it on the paper towel because it makes it easy for discarding it later, because you don't want to be washing that down your sink. But also you need to discard this and put it in the trash because it doesn't have any fermentation to it at this point to be able to use it for anything like you can once your starter is active and bubbly. So after I've removed the 50 grams, I'm now scraping down the sides of my jar, scraping down that starter into it. And then we're going to repeat what we did yesterday and add 50 grams of bottled or filtered water. And then you're going to also add 50 grams of bread flour to that. Then you're going to give it a really, really good mix, because you want to make sure all that flour is incorporated really well between the starter that's left over and the water. So you're going to give that a really good mix. And once again at the end, once you've mixed that, you are going to scrape down the sides of your jar again, and then you're going to pop your lid on it. Now you want a lid that's loose. So I use the wet jars and I leave the rubber off of it. I just sit the glass lid on top. So you want something like that so that the bacteria can get into it. And that's it for day 2. It's day 3 for our starter series of making our starter from scratch. I've got a new jar. I prefer that. I find it helps just keep my jar nice and clean, and it's easier to discard what you need to discard. So you're going to see that mine has a lot of good bubbles already, which is really good for day 2. Sometimes that will stall out after a couple more days, but at this point it's quite smelly still. So you will find that your starter will smell a little bit like stinky socks or fruit, like a rotting fruit. That's kind of what it smells like. And that's very normal for your starter while it's becoming active. So you're going to pop 50 grams of that starter into your jar. And then you're going to put 50 grams of your bottled or filtered water and 50 grams of your bread flour. And then you're going to give it a really, really good mix to incorporate all of those ingredients together really well. And then you are going to pop your lid on it and let it sit till tomorrow night. I like to use a lid that's loose, so that way it can get some airflow into there. So I like these weck jars, and I just don't put the rubber seal on there. I just pop the glass lid on top. Now, with your remaining discard from your other feedings, you are still at this point going to need to discard it into the rubbish. You can't use that starter because it doesn't have enough of the beneficial bacteria in it yet to be able to use it. Once you've got your starter going really actively, you won't have to throw it in the bin. You can use discard in recipes. But until it's established itself, you need to throw it in the rubbish. So that's what you're going to need to do. I do like to scrape down my spatula that I'm using and then put the lid on and let it go to bed overnight again until tomorrow night, and we will be back with day 4. It's day 4 of making our sourdough starter from scratch. So we're going to do the same as yesterday, which is get a clean jar and pop it on your scales. And you are going to add 50 grams of your starter. Now, today, mine definitely smells of more of a rotteny fruit kind of smell, which is very, very normal. So if yours is smelling a bit funky like that, that's completely normal. So don't worry about that. But anyway, you're going to pour 50 grams of that into your clean jar. And then you're going to zero out your scales and pour in 50 grams of bottled or filtered water as well. And then you're going to do 50 grams of your bread flour. And then you're going to give it a really, really good mix to get everything well incorporated. And then you're going to scrape down your sides so that you clean the sides up as much as you can. And then after that, we're just going to pop our lid back on. And like I've explained previously, you want a lid that's kind of loose. So I use these weck jars. They actually come with an orange band and clips to clip the lid down. So I don't put the orange band in there. I leave it band free, and I don't clip the lid down on my starter either. But so you just want something that's a bit loose. I have previously used like just a normal jar and like a screw top one, and then instead of putting the screw top lid on, I have put paper towel on to cover it overnight, which has worked quite well for me as in the past as well. And so then we're going to just pop the lid on it, and you're going to discard your old starter once again, and we'll be back tomorrow for day 5. It's day 5 of making our own sourdough starter from scratch. So you can see here, I'm showing you what mine looks like. It's got some little bubbles. It is growing in size each day. And at this point, it still smells more rotten fruitish at this point. So it's still not quite ready. Usually somewhere between 7 and 14 days is when your sourdough starter should be ready. So what we're doing today is, once again, I've got a new jar, and I'm adding 50 grams of that starter into the new jar, fresh jar. And then once again, we're going to add 50 grams of bottled or filtered water to our starter mix. And then we're going to add 50 grams of our bread flour as well to that. And then we're going to give it a really, really good mix again with a spatula, whatever you have that you've been using to mix with. So you want to make sure all the flour is well incorporated into your water and your starter, so that starter can feed the flour to make it active. And then you're going to scrape down the sides inside of your bowl all the way around, or your jar, I should say. And then we're going to pop our lid back on and discard still what's left. It's day 6 of making our starter from scratch, and I'm showing you here what mine looks like. It's got lots of small bubbles. It is rising as well, but I haven't measured to see if it's quite doubling in size yet. But we're still in the establishing stage at this point anyway. And so we're going to add 50 grams of that starter again, like we have on previous days, into our clean jar, and then add 50 grams of water and our 50 grams of bread flour. And you will see in this video, I mix the water into the starter before I add the flour. Sometimes I do that, sometimes I don't. I don't think it's really necessary, but if I do remember to do it, I like to do it because I feel like it distributes the starter a little more easily for me. So we're going to give that a good feed, give it its feed, and then give it a really good mix and scrape down our jar ready to pop the lid on. And you're going to still discard what you have in your other jar because it still hasn't built up enough good bacteria yet to be able to use it as discard. So you're still going to pop that in the bin. You don't want to be washing it down your sink, as I've said previously, because you will clog up your pipes in your sink. It's like glue. So here we are giving it a really good mix, and we're going to pop the lid on it and set it aside on the counter. You do want to leave this at room temperature. Once you get your starter established, you can refrigerate it. Then I like to, if I do that, I like to let it come up to peak and then I pop it in the fridge. But for now, you're needing to leave it on the counter, and we're feeding it every 24 hours. So we're just going to scrape down that and pop our lid on and put it aside and discard the rest of that discard into the rubbish bin. It's day 7 of starting our brand new sourdough starter from scratch. And here I'm showing you what mine is looking like. There's lots of bubbles in it. It still has a bit of a fruity smell, but it's getting less strong with that now. So it's getting close to being ready. Now, we're going to put 50 grams into our clean jar from that starter. And then once again, you're still going to discard what's left in that jar into the rubbish bin. Then you're going to zero out your scales and add 50 grams of bottled or filtered water. And then you're also going to zero out again and add 50 grams of your bread flour and give it a really, really good mix. And then you're going to scrape down your inside of your jar down as much as you can once you have given it a really good mix. And I'm just adding the flour in here now. And then going in with that really good mix. And then once you've scraped down the inside of your jar, this time around, we're going to now start measuring where it is. So once you scrape it all the way down in your jar, then you're going to use a marker. I use the Expo whiteboard markers because they wipe off really easily off the jar. I have used paint markers before, but I found that they didn't fully come off. So you're going to, once you've given that a good stir and pushed it all down into the jar, you're going to use that marker, and you'll see here in a second, and you're going to mark the outside of your jar where your batter, I guess, starter is coming up to on your jar. This first marker of mine, of course, didn't want to work very well, so I had to grab another one. But then you mark that side of your jar, and we're going to now start seeing whether it's starting to double in size in the 24-hour period. So pop your clean lid on and then come back tomorrow and we'll see where we're at tomorrow, and we will go from there what to do next. So we've reached day 8 of making our sourdough starter from scratch, and I'm showing you here compared to the line that I drew last night. You can see where my sourdough starter has risen to, which is indicating that it has doubled in size overnight. So what I suggest doing now, some people would say you could use it now, but I like to strengthen my starter a little bit so that I can be successful with making a loaf. So what we're going to do is do a higher ratio feed today. And so I'm starting here by pouring 20 grams. I think it actually went to 22 grams, so I just rolled with it. And then I did, zeroed out the scales, and I did 100 grams of water. I think it actually went to 102. And then I like to feed slightly more flour than water because I like my starter to be a little bit thicker. I don't like it really runny. And so I did 110 grams of the flour. And then we're going to give that a really good mix again as well. And then you're going to mark where your starter is. And I think what I'll do tomorrow is come back tomorrow morning and show you where mine's at, because it should have peaked by the morning. And then you can see, and I like to still feed it for a few days of doing this just to get a lot stronger of a starter so that my bread would then rise a lot better. So it can take between 6 and 10 days to get a really good starter. A lot of people say by about day 7, which it has doubled in size, but you want it doubling in size for at least a couple of days before it's ready to bake with. And so by giving it a higher ratio feed here, you are going to promote more bacteria and proper yeast that's going to make your starter stronger. So then we're going to scrape down the inside of our jar again and mark it with our marker and pop our lid on it. And then I will be back in the morning to show you where my starter is sitting at then. And then we can go from there with feeding. And I will talk you through a little bit more then tomorrow morning. Okay, so we've back this morning for day 9 now on our starter, and you can see that mine has more than doubled overnight, giving it that big ratio feed. So we have very, very active, good looking starter now that is very close to being able to be used. And what you're going to do is you are going to do the same kind of feed. So we're going to do about 20 grams. Mine went slightly over. It doesn't matter if it goes slightly over. It doesn't have to be precise. So long as you're feeding roughly the same amounts of water and flour and more than what you've got in your jar of starter. So I've done 21 grams there of starter. And then I'm adding in my water, I think I was aiming for about 100, but I think it went to about 111. Yep, there you go. And so then I've given that a good mix to incorporate the starter into the water. And then, like I said yesterday, I like to add slightly more flour than water because I like my starter to be a little bit thicker. So I think I did about 120 grams of the flour here into it. We'll see here in a sec. It's either 120 or 121. Yep, there you go, 121. And so then I've given it a really good mix, and you're going to scrape down the insides of your jar again, and you're going to mark it again. And we will be back tonight to check on the starters. But the one thing you can do now is the discard that's left in the other jar, you can start keeping that and now using it in discard recipes, which I will have some coming up very soon on my page. But we, for now, are going to just work on strengthening. So if it doubles by tonight, again, we'll feed it again a large amount tonight, and then tomorrow we can start using it and seeing how it goes. So it's looking very good. It's very much on track. And I just find giving it the bigger ratio feed to starter really strengthens up that starter. So we're going to pop our lid on it and keep it in a warm place. And I will see you back here tonight. So we're back here to do our last big feed of our making our new starter series before we will use our starter in the morning to make a loaf of sourdough bread. So we've got our clean jar here, and I'm just showed you what my starter looks like. And you can see it's extremely bubbly and very active and doing really well. So we're going to go in with around 20 grams. I think I ended up at 24 grams of starter. And then I aimed for about 100 grams of water. I went just slightly over, I think 103 grams. And then added the flour, which I liked, like I said yesterday, I like to feed slightly more flour than water, only by about 5 or so grams, 10 grams at the most, more than the water, because I do like my starter to be a little bit thicker. And I don't like how runny it is when you do equal parts water and flour. So I find just giving it that extra sort of 10 grams of flour over water, it helps thicken the starter up. But also giving a slightly bit more of flour also can have good benefits for your starter, because you're feeding it more starch for it to feed off of. And so it's giving it more food, and it's giving it strengthening your starter up even more, which is what I have found. So once you've given that a really good mix again, we're going to scrape down the sides of our jar on the inside, and we're going to mark our jar with where it's sitting at as well. And then we're going to pop our lid on, and we will be back in the morning where we will make our first round of sourdough with your brand new starter. So I will see you in the morning. So I'm going to talk a little bit here about maintaining your starter, and then tomorrow I might do a more in-depth video on maintaining it. Because it's a very new starter, at the moment we're just going to continue to feed it like we have done the last 2 days where we've done the higher ratio feed. So I'm doing about 20 grams of the starter again, and around 100 grams of water and 100 grams of flour, just slightly over 100 grams of flour. So, like I said, I'm a close enough is good enough person, especially when it comes to my starter. Provided I have more water and flour than starter, I just roll with it. So I had 22 grams of starter here, and I just did 109 grams, I think it was, of water, giving that a little mix. And then going to add in the flour. I think it was about 120 grams of flour, close-ish, just over what I did in water. So we're going to do that and mark it again tonight, see where we're at in the morning again. But the starter is still only a very new starter, so you want to keep feeding it regularly at the moment. And if it's out on the counter, you need to feed it every 24 hours. Some people say 12, but every 24 hours is fine. But I wouldn't be putting it in the fridge for a little bit longer yet, until we've got a little bit more activity going and it's a little more established. So at this point, I would be keeping it on the bench and discarding and feeding. So either making a loaf of bread with the discard, like as you're making it, or discarding it into another jar that you're keeping in the fridge, and you can use that discard to make discard recipes, which I will have some more videos coming up with some discard recipes that you can use that in. So we're going to do that for today, and then tomorrow I'm going to come back on and do a little bit more of a talk about feeding ratios and all of that kind of stuff with maintaining your starter. And then once you have it more established of what we can do then, where you don't have to feed it every single day. So I will be back tomorrow to do that with you guys.